It's a series of lectures that he gives on YouTube, and I'm basically going to build off. It's a series of lectures that he gives on YouTube, and I'm basically going to build off of that because I think he's really onto something here, and I think it's really interesting and important. So I'm going to start by referring to scripture a little bit, because I really do think that this whole subject is to be found in the Bible if we read the Bible correctly, so to speak. Not taking it as it's presented to us, but using it as source material that we deeply analyze and carefully consider using intelligence analysis, sometimes reverse engineering the truth out of the lies or the misrepresentations, but still the source is the Bible. So, in the beginning, God gave authority over all creation to humans when he said, "Fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." So, what does this tell us in Genesis 1:28? It tells us that God, El Elyon, right? We understand that God is El, the supreme being. He gave authority, dominion, over all of the living things and over the planet Earth to humans. Well, this is interesting because humans are not the only order of intelligent agencies on the earth. There's another order of intelligent human agencies who are active on the planet Earth, who are not human, right? And these are what we would call Elohim. They've also been called the Anunnaki. They've also been called the Archons. And they are intelligent beings, right? They can appear like humans. They can speak. They have language, culture, arms, legs, faces, right? And yet they have not been given dominion over the earth. Humans, like me and you, have been given dominion, right? And so now I'm going to read from the Quran, actually, now. And it says, Allah, right? It says, "And mention when we, Allah, said to the angels, prostrate," meaning bow down, "before Adam. So they prostrated, except for Iblis." And Iblis means Satan, right? In Islam, they call Satan Iblis. "He refused and was arrogant and became of the disbelievers." So in the Quran, Allah, or God, commanded Satan to bow to humans, to Adam, and Satan refused, right? So this is the origin of this whole adversarial situation with Satan, has to do with, in multiple traditions, his refusal to bow or submit to Adam. So God gave authority and dominion to Adam in the Bible and in the Quran. He said, this world is for humans, right? He gave this dominion to humans. And so therefore, he said, therefore, bow down, even you angels, to Adam. And most of them complied. But it appears that part of the origin of the dispute that Satan and his fallen apostate angels had with God was that they would not accept the dominion of Adam. They said, are we not superior to mankind? Are we not closer to God? Are we not made of a better thing, right? So in the Quran, it says, we are made of fire, but Adam is made of earth. Why should we, who are made of fire, bow down to Adam, who is made of earth, right? And so humanity was given dominion over the earth. And that's why the thrones of the planet Earth, the dominions of the planet Earth, the kingdoms, are occupied by humans. But the fallen angels wanted dominion over earth, and they wanted the power over the earth that God gave only to mankind. And this is important because this explains why we have the story of the Nephilim. So it says in Genesis 6:4, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. So very brief verse, but even as a child, I knew this verse was incredibly profound and was concealing a lot of information within itself. So the Nephilim we're going to have to talk about. And it says, the Nephilim were on the earth when the sons of God, which again, God is El, and sons of God is Elohim, So these are divine beings. You can call it gods with a lowercase g. You can call it angels. You can call it sons of God. And the ancient aliens theory would say these are aliens. And star people is what the First Nations call them. And sons of God, Anunnaki, you can call them. The Gnostics would call them archons, right? So these are our big brothers, our cousins, our older relatives, closer to God, more intelligent, more powerful, longer living, resembling human beings, but not human. They came to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. So these heavenly beings, these star people, these Elohim, these Anunnaki, they came down to the earth, and they had sex with human women, and they had children with those human women. Well, why did they do that? Was it because they found these women sexually attractive? Possibly, partly. But probably the reason is what Timothy Alberino was saying here. God set a seal upon the planet Earth where humanity and humanity only was given dominion over the planet Earth. We were given dominion over the fish of the seas. We were given dominion over the birds of the air. We were given dominion over every living thing on earth. Therefore, Satan and the fallen angels had no dominion on this earth. God did not ordain for them to have any dominion on this earth. They found a loophole. They realized that if they could impregnate human beings, they could have hybrid children who were technically human according to the legalistic framework. And strangely enough, the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of darkness operate on a legalistic framework, right? And this is very strange, but this is true. There are laws and contracts that are in effect in the spiritual world. So what they figured out is we can usurp the dominions of mankind. We can usurp humans' authority, God-given over earth, by creating hybrid children who have enough humanity in them that they can inherit the thrones of God and this authority and rule in the dominions of mankind on behalf of Satan and the fallen angels, and who will have some amount of demonic, Anunnaki, fallen angel blood. And these hybrids were called the Nephilim, which is why it says they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Well, mighty men means powerful men. Men of honor, men of renown means men of fame. So what this means is not just, athletic or strong people. What it means is politically and socially and culturally powerful people, aka pharaohs, kings, priests, rulers of monarchies, and establishers of dynasties. This is why every single dynasty on earth, from the Japanese emperors to the kings of the Merovingian dynasties, to Queen Elizabeth, they all say, we have the blood of gods. We have the blood of the star people. We have the blood of the sun god. We have the blood of the space people. We have the blood of angels. They all believe that they have a divine right to rule. And indeed, they do, in the sense that their authority comes down from a higher being above them. And this is why you get what's called the great chain of being. So in the great chain of being, which was the ruling principle for most of history, God is at the top. Under God, you have the angels. Under angels, you have the kings, queens, and pharaohs. Under the kings, queens, and pharaohs, you have the nobles, the barons, and the dukes, the lords and ladies. Under them, you have the knights or the samurai, the equestrian class, the warrior class. And under them, you have the common folk, the peasants, the people, the peons. This is called the great chain of being. So the idea is the rulers rule by divine decree. And the Bible confirms this. It says, obey ye therefore the local laws, because God has set up the rulers in their positions of authority, right? He has chosen for them to be in power. So you should honor their divine, divinely ordained authority, because obviously if you're the king, God purposed for you to be the king. So you should therefore not be, as a Christian, in defiance against the law in most cases. Obviously there's exceptions. So that's the idea of blue bloods, right? And that's why there was so much incest, right? Think about the Targaryens from Game of Thrones. They were having sex with their sisters and brothers. That was a big plot line where this noble family, this very powerful dragon-blooded family, which actually ties into this even more, the specific dragon association, which we talked about in the podcast, Yahweh and the Dragon. We pointed out that Yahweh appears to be a dragon, and Satan certainly is a dragon. So we realize that dragons are a big part of the spiritual landscape, and dragon-blooded or serpent-blooded people is what we call the serpent seed. serpent seed hypothesis ties into Cain and the children of Cain being serpent seed, and Satan being the great red dragon who holds the whole world in his sway. So if Satan has his followers and children, they are also draconic or reptilian or serpentine in nature, perhaps. And they interbred, whether they are serpentine or not, they are the followers of Satan into rebellion against God. They came down to earth and they started having sex with women and they started having children. And they did it because they were not permitted by God to rule over earth or the dominions of earth or the kingdoms of earth because they were not humans, and God gave the seal of authority to human beings over the earth. This was a legalistic loophole in order to put in partially demonic people into positions of rulership. And ever since then, we've had kingdoms and priesthoods ruled by Satan. And that's why in the Bible, Satan took Jesus out into the desert and said, bow down and worship me, and I will give you all the kingdoms of the earth. And he showed him Pharaoh, he showed him Egypt, showed him Greece and Rome, showed him Sumeria, Babylon, and Persia. And he said, look, I'll give you all of this. All you got to do to worship me, because he rules them all. How does he, Satan, who is not a human, rule all the kingdoms of the earth if the Bible just told us that God gave all the kingdoms of the earth to mankind? He was able to do that because the fallen angels created hybrids who could then rule as proxies, serving Satan and the fallen angels and ruling over mankind. And that's why we see the world is always moving towards evil. That's why the elites always lie to us. That's why the media always lies to us. That's why pharmacies and psychiatry is poisoning us and brainwashing us and brain damaging us. That's why war is an industry and sex trafficking is an industry and all this shit, right? Because Satan is at the helm. Because he's using his Nephilim, the mighty men, the men of renown, his hybrid children, the ruling bloodlines, the serpent seed ruling bloodlines, to rule over humanity. Right? So we need to understand this. This is a literal true story. Satan rebelled against God. The fallen angels came to earth. They did a genetic interbreeding program with humanity through actual sex or some spiritual means or through some physical means. Impregnated humans, created the Nephilim. So God is at the top, and remember, that is El Elyon, the supreme God, benevolent, compassionate, loving, wise, merciful, righteous. This is the God of light. This is El Elyon, the supreme being. One of his children was Satan, the adversary. And that being rebelled against God. This is all covered in Satan is the Key to a Unified Conspiracy Theory. You can find it in our Roundtable podcast channel on the Temple Mount server. 3 hours long. Goes into the war in heaven. The initial rebellion. After that rebellion, what happened is that Satan, the great red dragon, was cast down. Him and his fallen angels. No place was found for them in heaven anymore. So Satan and the fallen angels were cast down from heaven where? To hell? No, to earth. That's why Satan is called he who is in the world, he who holds the whole world in his sway, he who leads the whole world astray, he who walks to and fro upon the earth, seeking whom he may devour. He is very much in the world with his fallen angels. And also we know from his temptation of Jesus that he desired to be worshipped as God. So he has set up cults and altars and idols to his worship all over the world. And people have been sacrificing what? Always blood. In every case, blood. Human sacrifice. Infant sacrifice. Child sacrifice. Blood sacrifice. Animal sacrifice. Flesh sacrifice in every case. This is the nature of Satan. He desires blood sacrifice and he desires to be worshipped as God. And he has, therefore, also, we need to talk about the Book of Enoch. So the Book of Enoch is not included in the King James Version of the Bible, but it should be because the authors of the Bible reference the Book of Enoch as though they considered it true. So if you consider the authors of the Bible to be truthful and they consider the Book of Enoch to be relevant, then obviously the Book of Enoch is relevant. And the Book of Enoch elaborates on that one verse in Genesis about the sons of God, the Elohim, the children of El, came down to earth against God's commandment, took the daughters of men, created the Nephilim, the mighty men, who, by the way, were giants, right? So we need to point out that there are giants, okay? Now, you could question, Did giants perhaps mean something other than physical stature? But no, it did mean physical stature as well. We know that there were physically gigantic people in those days and also afterwards. So it says in Genesis 6:4, there were giants on the earth in those days and also afterwards. These were the Nephilim. So the original rulers of mankind had physiological differences. And when I say original, I mean after the fall. The rulers of mankind had physiological differences from other humans. I'm going to post those here. One was a greatly increased physical stature. So I'm going to try not to get distracted by posting sources while I'm doing the recording, but I'll post them later. If you look up pictures of the Egyptian pharaohs, you're going to notice three things. One, they are about twice to three times as tall as the other human beings who are depicted in those images. So they'll carve the pharaohs, and if you look in general chat, I'm posting some stuff about this. They'll carve them, and they'll carve them in relation to the people, and the people are described as being childlike in size compared to these pharaohs. These pharaohs were huge, physically very large. And if you go to the Sumerian kings list, as well as the Old Testament of the Bible, you'll also notice that they had extremely long lifespans. So people in the Bible could live up to 900 years or older. And in the Sumerian kings list, many of the kings ruled for thousands of years, right? So they lived longer. And we know that because in the book of Genesis, what happened? We got kicked out before we could eat of the tree of life. So what would the tree of life have done? It would have made us never die. It would have given us physical immortality. And it says in the plural, and God said, but it should read, and the Elohim said, let us cast humanity out of the Garden of Eden because they have eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That we did pull off. That's why we have consciousness. That's why we have conscience. And that's why we have sentience. But we got kicked out before we could eat of the second tree. So we are therefore half gods. We are half gods. In the Bible, Jesus said, I tell ye are gods. And that's a quote from Psalms. Ye are gods with a lowercase g. Gods with a lowercase g translates to Elohim, children of God. So we are children of God. We are made in the image of God, which is very important. We've been given the seal of authority by God, which gives us dominion over the planet that God created for us as our possession, and that's our inheritance, which is the planet Earth. And we also have received the knowledge of good and evil, right? And Satan said, the serpent said to Eve in the garden, if you eat of the fruit, you will become like God, knowing good and evil. So one thing that makes us like God is our image. We are the image, the perfect physical and spiritual representation of God, as Christ was. But also we have the knowledge of good and evil, and that is our moral sentience. But what we didn't get to do is eat of the tree of life, which would have made us immortal. And they said, let us cast them. The Elohim, the Anunnaki, said, let us cast them out before they become like us. So in other words, the only difference really between us and them is that we have a temporary lifespan and they have an immortal lifespan. But also it says they were giants and mighty men, men of renown. So the hybrids had many advantages. They were physically huge. They had long lifespans, which is why the Sumerian kings ruled for thousands of years. And they had greatly elongated craniums. And that's why you get these long skulls in the Paracus skulls, the Star Child skulls, Homo capensis, which is a more intelligent human with a longer skull, supposedly, that exists alongside us on Earth, and some people still may be today. And that's why cradle boarding was done. So around the world, they say, oh, it's just cradle boarding. The reason people have elongated, pointy conehead skulls, and by the way, conehead, right, kind of soft disclosure, because they knew the coneheads were real. Not obviously as they're depicted, but people with that cone-shaped skull, that was a nudge, nudge, wink, wink thing, because that was real. So around the world, you'll find these certain skulls, and those skulls have this elongated shape, and most of them are actually from cradle boarding, which is a form of body modification where people would take their children when their skulls were soft and pliable in infancy, they'd strap their heads to a board. And they do that to deform the skull to have a cone head shape. Now, why in the world would that have developed? Well, it's not that hard to figure out. It's because the leaders and the elites, the pharaohs, the kings, had that shape naturally. And obviously the people who were subordinate and looked up to those people as godlike, semi-divine rulers wanted to emulate them. And that's the whole reason why cradle boarding was done. But we know that cradle boarding is not the explanation of these skulls, because the real ones have missing parietal sutures. So I took forensic anthropology in school, which is how to, identify bodies and stuff from corpses and whatnot. And one thing you'll learn is, well, the skull has certain suture lines, which are like, wavy lines that divide the skull into certain plates that bind together at these sutures. And the truly elongated skull is the Boskop skull. Look at Boskop skull, Paracas skull, Starchild skull. They are missing a suture line. That means they are not human. Every single human who's ever been born has a parietal suture, but the Paracas skulls, the Starchild skulls, the Boskop skulls, they don't have it. Impossible. They're not human. They also have bigger, wider orbital apertures, right? So the eye socket is bigger, the spacing is different. And there's also something called like the Farron magnum or something, which is part of the skull, which is in a different position. They also have different cranial capacity. And that's not possible because even if you deform the skull, you're just changing the shape of a certain thing. You can't increase its capacity. You can't increase its size. You can only change the way that size is distributed. But in these ones, they actually have a substantially larger cranial capacity and a larger brain. So these were a more intelligent species with bigger heads, longer heads. And that's why in the pharaohs were depicted with this, right? So if you look in general chat, you've seen, I've posted some pictures of the pharaohs. And also if you look at, for example, the hats that popes wear, the cardinals, they wear those long, pointy white hats, right? And I'll post some of these pictures too. If you look in general chat, those hats were potentially a reference to this elongated skull shape, which is also seen in the pharaohs and the funny hats that they wore, and in the Mayan, Aztec cultures and Peruvian cultures where you find megalithic structures. Megalithic really means giant-sized structures. Where you found giant-sized structures existing alongside giant people with giant heads. And giants are real, right? So we need to, this is kind of meandering and I'm mixing all these topics together, but I think you guys get what I'm getting at here. So Abraham Lincoln, let's read this quote. He said, "The eyes of that extinct species of giants whose bones fill the mountains of America have gazed on Niagara as our eyes do now." So for Abraham Lincoln, it was understood these giants existed. In the Bible, of course, we all know about David and the giant Goliath, but he was only the smallest of his family. Goliath had bigger brothers, and we know that there were much bigger giants than Goliath. In the Old Testament, it says that when the Hebrews went into the land of Canaan or something, they were so big that they appeared as grasshoppers in their sight. And as we appeared to them, we also appeared to ourselves, is what it says. So they felt like they were insects compared to these people, and in terms of size, and that's how they also were seen. So they were tiny compared to these people. Now, we can assume there was exaggeration there. It didn't literally mean the size difference was the same as a grasshopper to a person. They weren't that big, but obviously it was a reference to the fact that they were giants, like actual giants. And we have these bodies. They've been found all over the world through America, and they've repeatedly been taken by the Carnegie Museum, is it? Something like that? Can't remember the name of it right now. It's a very famous museum. I don't think it is Carnegie. It's something like that. It's like a famous, prestigious museum, and they take all these skeletons and then they disappear, and you don't see them ever again. So there's been a big cover-up of this, essentially. But there were giants. The giants and these highly intelligent beings with elongated skulls were the Nephilim. And again, the reason that this happened was because the fallen angels, the servants of Satan, were cast down from heaven to earth, and they wanted to control the earth as their dominion and their kingdom, because it says in the Bible that no place was found for them in heaven anymore. So, therefore, earth has become the kingdom of Satan, the fallen angels, the archons, the Anunnaki that were cast down. And they have taken over human governments by creating hybrid children who they then established to be the priesthood and the royalty of the planet Earth. So the royal dynasties, the emperors, and the priests were hybrids or serving the hybrids. And again, this always seems to have gone along with human sacrifice. And the Bible went about stamping this out, destroying these idols and banning human sacrifice and child sacrifice. Now we need to remember that in the Old Testament, Yahweh, right, demanded that Abraham human sacrifice his own son on a pyre, burn him alive or whatever, and kill him. So this ties into the Yahweh and the Dragon podcast, because we need to remember the being in the Old Testament, who we call Yahweh, demanded genital mutilation, demanded blood sacrifice, and demanded child sacrifice. So I would argue that we must therefore be concerned that that being is actually precisely the self-same dragon who demands these things. But regardless, El does not demand these things, and El is the adversary of Satan. Now, the point is, those beings, the Nephilim, established all the governments of the world today, and they're still working towards the advancement of the creation of a system where Satan can begin to rule openly over the planet Earth. So currently, Satan rules the world not openly and not completely. So he controls all the nations of the earth. There are elites and rulers at the highest levels who practice human sacrifice, satanic ritual abuse of children and otherwise, blood drinking rituals, and all that kind of stuff. This has gone back to Elizabeth Bathory and Gilles de Rais, all the way back to the Middle Ages. The true high-level elites have been doing the most sadistic, dark Eldar, evil type shit. Because they're all part of this, right? They rule, they have power, that, you know, the last shall be first and the first shall be last. Well, currently we're where the first shall be first and the last shall be last. So these people are eating their spiritual inheritance right now. They're eating their souls, and they're eating our bodies, and they're eating the planet Earth. But in the future, everything will be recompensed. The victims will become the victors, and the victors will become the criminals who will pay the price. But you just need to understand that they've created this agenda of putting hybrids in power over us to usurp God's seal of authority over the earth. And then we have to consider the flip side of that scenario, where they are now trying to alter our DNA and alter our genetics. And I'm going to speak in aphorisms here because this is now a taboo subject, right? But there may or may not have been, or may not be in the future, certain technologies which have become mandatory, right, which everyone was forced to accept, which have the effect of changing our biology and changing our genetics and changing our DNA. I don't know what it is. I think it's some kind of hair or toothpaste or something. I can't remember what it was that did that. But there was something that everybody had to take that apparently changed their genetics and their DNA. Now, why was that so important? Why is that such an agenda? Could it be precisely because we were given dominion over Earth as human beings? And if they can change what it means to be human, change our DNA, change our genetics, change our blueprint, the way that God made us in various ways, including on a genetic level, as well as through transhumanism, implants, and so forth, make us different than humans so that we lose our authority over Earth because we're no longer the human beings that God gave authority to. But on the flip side, allowing the fallen angels to usurp our authority by hybridizing, right, with humans and putting semi-human hybrids, human enough to sit on the thrones that God ordained for mankind. And then you look again to the alien abduction literature, and the overwhelming, most consistent narrative is hybridization, right? People get sexual stuff done, semen is taken, eggs are taken, they're shown hybrid babies, babies with big black eyes, black-eyed children. They're told this is your child. They're taking our DNA. They're doing the sexual experimentation. They're taking our eggs. They're taking our semen, right? And then they're creating these hybrids to continuously create humans who are more and more demonic, less and less human, while changing the DNA of the human cattle in their farm to be farther and farther away from human. And if you look around, you see people don't resemble humans anymore, right? People are like 300 pounds. If you were to put them as a drawing beside what people looked like, they don't look the same anymore, right? Like the movie WALL-E. So they're physically changing us, right? At the same time as they're genetically changing us, at the same time as they're making themselves more and more human and making ourselves less and less human. And God cares about these things. So in the Old Testament, we learn that as in the days of Noah, well, this New Testament, as in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man. Well, the Son of Man is Jesus Christ, right? He used the term Son of Man to refer to himself over and over again. So when it says in the day of the Son of Man, it's talking about the day when Jesus Christ returns, okay? Now, as it was in the days of Noah, well, that was when the flood happened. So we need to talk about the flood. Why did the great deluge, Noah's flood, happen? It happened because mankind had corrupted all flesh. They had hybridized. They had created human-animal hybrids. All of this is described in the book of Giants and in the book of Enoch. We had created, or somehow Satan had created, human-animal hybrids and giants who were not human. They were genetically corrupted. And that's why it says of Noah, he was perfect in his generations. What that means is he was genetically pure, because at that time, all of the genetics had been corrupted by genetic engineering, right? Genetic engineering is a very dangerous technology, very spiritually harmful from a biblical point of view, because God is the creator of nature, right? And when we start hybridizing and transgenically changing his creation, we risk corrupting his creation. And when we corrupt his creation, he destroys it and makes it again. And that's what will happen in the days of the Son of Man. So in the days of Noah, there were giants running around, hybrids, and human-animal hybrids, as well as human-angel hybrids. And they were eating all of the possessions of mankind to the point that mankind couldn't even sustain them anymore. So they're eating all the food, and then they started eating people. And so when people couldn't sustain them anymore, they were crying out to God and saying, when will you avenge us? How long will you allow us to be persecuted, be these horrible flesh-eating hybrid giant overlords? And God eventually unleashed the flood, the great deluge, to eradicate these beings. So why would God do this, right? Well, it's because his creation had been corrupted, so he wiped it clean with the flood. And after that, he sealed it with the covenant of the rainbow, and he said, I will never destroy the world again by water. But he didn't say, I'll never destroy the world again. He said, I'll never destroy it again by water. And so he will destroy it again. He will destroy it again by fire. So in the days of Noah, the world was corrupted by genetic engineered hybrids and so forth, as well as universal spiritual and moral corruption and perversity. In the future, it will be destroyed by fire. So the coming deluge is a deluge of fire, and it seems clear we are now in the days of the Son of Man, because we are now creating human monkey hybrids, human pig hybrids, human rat hybrids, human sheep hybrids, right? I've posted these things many times. This is being done. So they're corrupting the way of all flesh, corrupting the crops, Monsanto patented genetic engineering of crops, Terminator seeds and all that stuff, along with the human-animal hybridization, along with the universal spiritual and moral degradation that is the agenda, along with the genetic engineering of humanity through mass implemented technologies. And we have to mention that that is the infrastructure, the scaffolding on which will be created the mark of the beast. So as we've discussed in the podcast, multiple podcasts we've done about the book of Revelations, the Antichrist and end times prophecy, there will come a mark of the beast that is mandatory for both great and small, both slave and free, both rich and poor, must receive the mark of the beast in the hand and the forehead, without which they cannot buy or sell. Now, these beast system cannot be created all at once. It has to be a boiling frog method. And so they are customizing us to submission to authority, to mandatory government decreed interventions in our bodies, into criteria to buy or sell, right? You need to have a certain card or a certain identity or a certain status, have received a certain intervention in order to buy or sell. So we're coming to that point. And with technology in Sweden and other places, they now have the RFID microchip that goes in the fleshy part between the index finger and the thumb. You can swipe it over the reader and use it to buy or sell, and it's being used to hold your status of a certain thing. I can't remember what it was, shampoo or something, but you had to have something to show that you had it to buy or sell. And that's happening right now. So we can deduce from the microchip, from the mandatory medical interventions that alter your biology, from the transgenic sciences creating human-animal hybrids, as well as from the universal apostasy and moral degradation being pursued, that we are now entering the days of Noah, which is to say the days of the Son of Man, which means the beast system and all of this. So this is just basically what I'm trying to get out here. We need to understand the origins of humanity. We are not a naturally evolving or occurring species. We are the result of an intelligent top-down intervention, right? We were created by God, but we were also altered socially, culturally, and technologically, as well as biologically, by beings who we can call the Watchers, the fallen angels, the archons, the demons, the aliens, the greys, whatever you want to call them. We are creations of God. We're not creations of evolutionary nature in a pure sense. And we have been altered from our original schematic by this process. The book of Genesis encodes it. The book of Enoch describes it openly. And the book of Enoch also describes the process of technological transfer that occurred. So when the fallen angels, the Elohim who apostatized the apostate angels, were cast down to earth, right, after the war in heaven, that's described in the first UCT episode, they not only began the hybridization program by impregnating women and giving birth to the first of the Nephilim and the first of the giants who established the world governments that still rule today, as well as the cults of human sacrifice, torture, and all the rest, sadistic ritual stuff that they do. All of that was established, right? The priesthoods of Moloch, the priesthoods of Baal, it's described in the Bible, making your children pass through the fire. So all that evil shit was artificially given to us by evil intelligent beings, right? And this is all described in the book of Enoch. Even my namesake, Daniel, is one of the Elohim, right? Any name that ends in El is one of these. Michael, Gabriel. The name El means God. So these are the names of the different children of God. Daniel was in the book of Enoch. He's one of these demons, but the demon, he's, whatever, one of these fallen angels, they each taught humanity different forbidden things that they weren't supposed to know. So we didn't evolve all this technology on our own. We didn't develop this highly advanced weapons technology and biotech that we have now. We received it from the fallen angels. And that's why the period of time between when we made fire and we made the International Space Station is absurdly short. Like, there was more technological progress in a very short period of time than all the time ahead of it, because it wasn't a natural stair-step evolution. It was a process of reverse engineering and technological transfer. So our weapons technology, cosmetic technology, and many other technologies, including occult and magical knowledge, was given to us by the fallen angels, who came down and also altered our DNA and also created and usurped human thrones and created dynasties, empires, and priesthoods. And the world still is run by these beings, right? So this is what we need to understand. And this is what we need to be aware of and on guard about, right? And we need to understand what it means to be made in the image of God, right? Because we're made in the image of God. And it says in the Bible that Jesus Christ is, the perfect image of the Creator, and we also partake of that. And these fallen angels are trying to change that about us and to usurp our authority and bring about the mark of the beast system. So that basically kind of concludes what I wanted to get out in this narrative. And again, it really ties into Satan is the key to a unified conspiracy theory, The War in Heaven, episode 1. Jesus the Phoenician, episode 2, and Yahweh and the Dragon, episode 3. So call this, episode 4, the Nephilim and the giants. And again, the coming deluge of fire. You need to understand that what's coming in the future is a wiping clean of the corrupted system, again, this time by fire. And we'll do a podcast in the future about New Jerusalem, because New Jerusalem is essentially the alien and rescue, inherit the earth. Well, what does it mean to inherit the earth? Literally, there will be a new heaven and a new earth created, and it will be given to the righteous, the long-suffering, the enduring, right, and those who are sanctified and given the mark of the Lamb. So people talk about the mark of the beast all the time. If you take the mark of the beast, the Bible says you go into the lake of fire. You take the mark of the beast, you worship him in his image. That's not good. But there's also the mark of the Lamb. And all the events of tribulation, the, starvation and death and natural disasters that occur that kill most of the world, none of those occur until after the Lamb, meaning Jesus Christ, has marked his chosen, right? It says they shall be with the Lamb and they shall be called chosen and faithful and true. Those will be marked first before all of this happens. So don't just think about avoiding the mark of the beast. Also think about receiving the mark of the Lamb, right? You need to be prepared and need to understand the process that's taking place. And the ultimate effect of this is, well, it's the immanentization of the eschaton, but more specifically, in the Bible it says the miracle of Christ, or whatever, the miracle that God has done for us, is to translate us from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of his son, Jesus Christ, which is the kingdom of light. So when you are saved through Jesus Christ, when you receive Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you will be translated spiritually from the kingdom of Satan, which is the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of this earth, into the kingdom of light, which is the kingdom of his son, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ. And yet, the same thing must occur at the external level. So we can spiritually be translated individually into the kingdom of Jesus Christ, but that must occur and will occur for the whole planet externally, right? The whole planet as a planet will be translated out of the kingdom of darkness and into the kingdom of light, which is what it's referring to when it says the old heaven and the old earth have passed away, a new heaven and a new earth have been created. That will be inherited by the meek, right? And meek doesn't mean weak. It means those who endure suffering without complaint or bitterness. That's what meek means. Those of us who have been persecuted under the kingdom of Satan will receive compensation. So Jesus and God is just, right? And his justice is not just to punish the guilty party, right? Satan, the beast, and the false prophet, and those who worship the image of the beast and take his mark will be cast in the lake of fire. So we know that there will be justice, there will be punishment for those who did evil, but that is not sufficient. There must also be reconciliation and restitution, compensation for those who suffered. So those who gain now at the expense of others will pay in full, and those who have been persecuted in the name of Jesus Christ or for righteousness will be compensated by inheriting the earth. And the way that happens is those who are marked by the Lamb will go into New Jerusalem, which will descend, a four-sided city with 12 gates, and they will be taken on board that cubical life support system. And it is a spaceship to all intents and purposes. It comes from heaven. Remember, the ancient people used the word heaven to refer to what we now call outer space. The dome of heaven referred to the stars and so forth, the Milky Way galaxy. And you need to remember that as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man. Well, the deluge, the global flood of Noah that was used to wipe out the transgenic hybrids, the giants, the Nephilim, and the abominations in the earth at that time, that story was older than the Bible. And that story comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh. And the Epic of Gilgamesh has the story of Noah's Ark. And in that, it doesn't describe it as a boat like it does in the Bible. It describes it as a cube, right? The original story describes Noah's Ark as a cube. And yet in the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, it is a cubical structure that descends to take on board mankind, that which is pure in mankind, and we can assume in nature. So this is a cyclical process, right? God destroys the corrupted system. He descends a cubical structure. He takes on board the seed of life and of humanity that is pure. He repopulates the cleansed world with the elect, the chosen, right? So this is what we need to do, is make sure that we, or at least those we love, can be amongst those who go into the cubical life support structure. And it is a life support structure. It's clear in the book of Revelation. It has its own light source. It specifies it will not need the sun or moon. Has its own light, won't need the sun or moon. Has its own water source. It says the waters of life proceed freely from the throne of God. You can drink of it freely without price. He who drinks of that water, we know, will never thirst again. That's what Jesus said. Also along the river that runs through the cubical spaceship that we'll go into, called New Jerusalem, there are trees growing on both sides that produce 12 different kinds of fruit, one for each month of the year, and all of which are good to eat and for healing and medicine. So it has its own food, its own water, its own light, its own medicine. And so this is our life support structure. It comes down from what we would call outer space, gathers on board the righteous and the saved. Then the world is destroyed in the deluge of fire, right, which is coming. And then a new heaven and earth are created. And then those who are on board the life support vehicle called New Jerusalem will go back out into the world, which is now a restored Garden of Eden type scenario, a global Garden of Eden. Then we'll live immortally, and Jesus Christ will rule over the earth as the king. And that's what's called the coming of the kingdom of heaven. So when we talk about spiritual warfare, we're talking about the advancement of the kingdom of heaven. And when we dedicate ourselves to to God, we are dedicating ourselves to the advancement of the kingdom of heaven. First of all, becoming citizens of it ourselves, and then struggling righteously. And the Bible even said, well, the Bible says struggling vigorously, let's put it that way, to seize hold of it. It says the violent have been seizing hold of it, right? The kingdom of heaven has been advancing through violence, and the violent have been seizing hold of it. And obviously, I'm not endorsing violence. It's not what I'm saying. But the point is, we are called to be spiritual warriors. It's not a passive thing. We are fighting an enemy, an adversary called Satan. He is the ruler of this world. We are fighting on behalf of the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus said, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So Jesus was praying for this, meaning it was not currently in place. So currently the kingdom of heaven has not come. God's will is not done on earth as it is in heaven. And our job is to work towards the advancement of that. And when Jesus comes, the kingdom of heaven will have come, not just in our hearts, as it can be now, but in the world outside of us. And we need to understand that in the Bible, it says, we need to understand the importance of the serpent and the dragon and Leviathan, right? These are three different things. Leviathan is the great satanic serpent of the ocean, the dragon of the seas. He is the enemy of Yahweh, right? Yahweh broke the head of the dragon, or at least God did. And God will break the head of Leviathan, who's a hydra, multiple-headed. This character comes up again, very similar, multi-headed dragon in Revelation. And it says that dragon will come up from the abyss. Well, the abyss, we think of that as like hell, but abyss means the deep ocean is the abyss. So this is Leviathan, the great dragon of the ocean, will come out of the ocean. So a great beast will rise from the sea. And that beast is the the dragon will rise out of the sea, right out of the abyss, where Satan is currently constrained. He will come up to the earth and he will give his authority to the beast. And the beast is a man, right? It says the beast has the shape of a man. That is the Antichrist. And the dragon that comes out of the abyss is Satan. And so Satan, Leviathan, the dragon, comes out of his prison deep beneath the ocean and the abyss. He gives his authority to the beast who is man. That is the Antichrist. And then the Antichrist is set up at the head of the beast system. He will set himself up in the place of God, take for himself the names and titles of God, change the dates and times of God, utter all manner of blasphemies, called the man of lawlessness. And he'll bestow signs and wonders, including raining fire down from heaven. He'll suffer a fatal head wound and he'll survive it. And he'll initiate the mark of the beast, causing everyone to take the mark in the forehead or the hand, buy or sell, and to worship him, right? And then there will be the great tribulation. And ultimately, it is Jesus Christ who is at war with the serpent. So I'll post this image later, but it says in the Bible that Jesus Christ crushes the head of the serpent, and the serpent will bruise his heel. This is in Genesis. So you need to understand there is a conflict on this earth between reptilians or draconids or serpent seed and humans. And it says, I shall set up enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. It says in the Bible, there will be enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. This is referring to the conflict between the reptilians and the humans. It's not talking about snakes. It would be ridiculous to think that God was saying, I'll set up enmity between actual snakes and people. But you can't have an adversary that's just an animal, right? This is talking about two races of beings coexisting on the same planet. One of them, the children of Satan, who again is the great red dragon. And he is associated with a serpent of Genesis. And in old school language, a serpent or a worm was a dragon, right? A snake and a dragon were interchangeable terms. And in the New Testament and Book of Revelation, it says the dragon tries to eat a baby, a specific baby. That baby is Christ, right? King Herod tried to kill Jesus when he was born. The same thing happened with Moses. They tried to kill him when he was a baby. And they'll try and kill Christ. The dragon tries to devour the baby, but the baby is protected.
Was Moses Jesus?
Well, no, Moses is not Jesus, but the point is in the Bible and in God's work, there are cycles, there are patterns, right? So remember, the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years, right, before they could inherit Israel. Jesus fasted and prayed in the desert for 40 days, and in the period of Noah's Ark, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. So why is it always this period of purification and a period of testing or cleansing? It takes a period of 40 years or 40 days, multiple times. There's multiple stories in the Bible that repeat. So Moses was not Jesus, but both Moses and Jesus had rulers who tried to kill them when they were babies. And this is also described in the book of Revelation. So the point I'm making is we are called to be knights, right? Knights of the Round Table, knight rank, Templars were knights, holy knights, right? And there is the image of our server, right? The server icon is Saint George and the dragon, right? He was a saint who slew a dragon. Archangel Michael slays the dragon. Jesus slays the dragon. Satan is the dragon, right? We have to be Saint George. We have to fight on behalf of humanity. We have to fight against the serpent seed. We have to fight against the children of the dragon and against the dragon himself. We must slay the dragon in our hearts, which is our own sin and evil. We have to slay the dragon in the human world, which is the human forces of evil that serve the Nephilim kingdoms of Satan. And we need to fight against the big dragon himself, Satan. But ultimately, that victory will be won by Jesus Christ and Michael, Archangel Michael. Some people think they're the same thing. But these are the two figures that will defeat Satan. And you can literally see the artwork, the beautiful artwork we've used on our server. St. George killing the dragon and Archangel Michael killing the dragon. And just remember, the dragon is amongst us. These reptilians can take human form, right? And hybrid as well. So this ties together the Bible, the Anunnaki, the ancient aliens, and the Gnostic doctrine. They're called the Archons. And it ties together end times prophecy, you know, the old times of the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh all the way to the current times with RFID microchip, genetic engineering, mandatory shampoo, and all that stuff, right? So this is kind of what I want to get out today. And I'll stop my monologue now. But does anyone have any questions or comments?
I do.
Go ahead, bro.
Okay, I have 2 to 3 questions or points. First off, I like how you tied the Anunnaki stuff into the Bible. When I first got into conspiracy theories, Anunnaki were one of the first topics I researched, but then I kind of moved on from it because it gets all convoluted when you start researching it. Like we start talking about Enki and Enlil, it started getting confusing, you know. But I like how you tied everything together. Second point. Do you think so? You know, like there's like different dimensions, 3D, 4D, 5D, and such. These fallen angels. Do you think they're like 4-dimensional beings, and their offspring, they were 3-dimensional beings, basically?
I think that's an interesting idea. I can't really speak on that, right? What I will say, in the sense that I don't know, right? What I will say is we tend to think of these angels as spiritual beings, in a sense, like as a different order, like extra-dimensional, trans-dimensional, energetic, or something like that. But we know from the biblical narrative, at least, that they, you know, came into the daughters of men and bore children by them, which means that they must have been capable of producing, you know, something that served an equivalent function to semen to have sex. And if you actually read the Bible, when the angels appear, people generally don't know that they're angels because they appear so similar to human beings that people actually believe that they are people until they reveal their nature later. So in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the angels go to visit Lot, and he has them into his house, and he feeds them, and he thinks they're people. And that's why you get the verse, be charitable or hospitable, because you never know when you'll entertain angels unaware, meaning like you could literally have angels over as house guests. And now in the Bible, like in the story of Gideon, the angel comes and he says he's an angel, and Gideon doesn't believe him because, well, he doesn't know, or he says, you need to prove it to me because you can't tell by looking at them. They look like people. And he brings the angel food, and the angel touches the food with his staff, and the food burns up. So he doesn't eat the food. But so the point is, like, I don't know, right? Like, they appear to be capable of becoming physical or interacting with physical objects. There's stories about people wrestling with angels. Jacob, I think it is, wrestles with an angel and even throws his hip out. So they appear to be physical, but then obviously they can, you know, maybe they're just, solidifying themselves down to a lower dimension to interact with people. But that's sort of beyond my ability to know that. I don't know. What I will say is angels, God, and the devil definitely have more physicality and physical substance and similarity to human beings than we generally think. We're all kind of like closely related, right? It's like we tend to think that God and the angels are so different from humans as to be of sort of no comparison. But it actually kind of seems more like we're pretty close, right? Because in the book of Genesis, he says, like, oh, well, we got to kick these humans out of the Garden of Eden because they're very close to becoming like God. Like, the only difference, according to the book of Genesis, between humans and God, quote unquote, the Elohim, is that humans have a mortal lifespan, right? But the implication is if we had only eaten of the fruit of life, we would have become immortal, and becoming immortal, we would have become fully like God, knowing both good and evil from the tree of knowledge and having eternal life. So you could basically say we are gods with a mortal lifespan, right?
Can I have one more question, please, if you don't mind?
Yes, of course.
Okay. You brought up Leviathan. I posted something like in chat the other day. I'll post it again. So you see, in the middle picture I posted, like, I wonder if space is considered the ocean you were talking about, and when you go past a certain point in the solar system, that's where Leviathan is guarding the gateway to heaven, or something like that.
Well, it's actually extremely interesting, and this is completely new. Yeah, I see that there's a line there that says Leviathan. And so Leviathan is a great serpent or primordial dragon or reptile of the sea with many heads. It's a huge sea monster that lives in the ocean, has some kind of enmity with God, and God sets a special bond or boundary on it. And it appears that this is probably the same being that rises up out of the sea in the book of Revelation, is also a big dragon with many heads that comes out of the ocean. Seems like it would likely be the same thing. And there's this narrative about God killing this dragon in the past and in the future. And so here's what's fascinating. In the Christian or Hebrew or biblical, in the biblical cosmology, right, is very different than how we've been taught to think of the earth. So in the biblical cosmology, there's something called the firmament that separates the waters above from the waters below. And so the firmament is in the place that we would think of as the sky. And the firmament is described in the Bible as strong, like molten glass. So it's a substance, it's strong, and it's something like molten glass or melted glass, right? And that is the firmament. And the firmament separates the waters below from the waters above, which means that above what we call the sky is an ocean or a sea, primordial sea, both above us and below us, meaning if you were to go up towards the stars, you would eventually encounter an ocean above you. And heaven, the heaven of heavens, is actually somewhere above or in that ocean. Now, this image here depicts Leviathan several layers above the earth, right? And just between where God is. So yes, this would make sense, right? If Leviathan is a beast of the ocean, he could be living in the waters above, right? That's a very interesting concept. And therefore also, according to that image, he would be separating us from God, right? We're down there on earth. Leviathan is encircling us. The snake eating its own tail, or Ouroboros, the serpent that circles the world tree, is therefore standing between us and God. That makes perfect sense and is totally mind-blowing. I haven't really seen it represented that way. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. But it should also be mentioned that it says in the Bible, no place was found for him anymore, and he was cast down to earth. So therefore, we could conjecture that the Leviathan who did dwell in the waters above has since been cast down. And remember, it says in the Bible, rejoice heavens, for Satan and the fallen angels have been cast down, but woe to the earth and the seas. The seas is mentioned, woe to the earth and the seas, because Satan has come down in great wrath, knowing his time is short. So I would postulate that Leviathan was cast down from the waters above, and now resides in the waters below and in the earth, and is in the ocean, right? So Satan right now is not in hell. He is active on the earth, but he is, in my opinion, dwelling in the deep ocean, right? Being this dragon, being this serpent, because this is what's called the abyss, right? If you talk about abyssal gigantism is the tendency of deep sea fish to grow very large, because that's called the abyssal realm. Like those weird fish that are really scary looking and ugly, those are called abyssal fish. So when in the Bible it says that the beast, the dragon, will rise up from the abyss, it's talking about the deep, deep, dark ocean. And I think, something very uncommonly said, but I think we should be hyper literal about the book of Revelation in some degree, because in the book of Revelation, it talks about a great beast rising out of the sea. And people think, oh, well, there couldn't be a great beast rising out of the sea. It must be some kind of metaphor. I don't think we should be so sure of that. I think there is an actual giant monster in the ocean that will actually come out, right? And that we might actually see these huge creatures that are described in Revelation ending up actually being huge creatures. Now, of course, I don't know, but I don't think we should rule it out. It's entirely plausible, and it ties into the Leviathan. We know from the Bible that Leviathan is real. We know from the Bible that Leviathan is a huge reptile, right, living in the sea. It specifies reptile, which therefore means it's not talking about sharks. It's not talking about whales. Leviathan is a giant reptile that lives in the ocean, and it has many heads, right? It's a many-headed giant reptile or dragon that lives in the ocean. And in the book of Revelation, the great red dragon that rises out of the ocean has many heads. And the book of Revelation pertains to this being who is the dragon. So I would postulate that the Leviathan that you showed in that image was defeated in the war in heaven, was cast down from that higher realm, now dwells on earth and in the waters below, in the abyss, is currently being restrained by God. At a certain point will be set free, will rise up out of the ocean, will give its authority to the beast, who is the Antichrist, will institute the beast system, and eventually will achieve Satan's ultimate goal of putting the Antichrist on the throne of God, being worshipped as God, most of the world worshiping the Antichrist, and therefore worshiping the dragon. By worshiping the image of the beast, or worshiping the dragon. The dragon is Satan. And again, as I said, this hybridization thing is all about usurping the seal of authority. God gave dominion over the earth, the seas, the birds, and all living things to human beings. Satan desires to take that authority for himself. So in order to do that, it's a twofold assault to change human genetics and human DNA and human shape so that we no longer resemble the image of God, and we no longer resemble the genetic thumbprint of God's creation, as well as changing the genetics of the earth, but also to insinuate the serpent seed, the dragon satanic DNA, into human beings through the hybridization, through the Nephilim, through the ruling bloodlines. So it works both ways, taking us out of the image of God and usurping themselves into the image of God to temporarily usurp dominion over the earth from both humanity and God. All of this ultimately to be set right by the return of Jesus Christ, by the final war of Armageddon, by the deluge of fire, the destruction of heaven and earth, the creation of new heaven and earth, and the salvation of those marked by the Lamb and saved in New Jerusalem, essentially, is what I believe is going on.
At the beginning of this podcast, you brought up the notion, or basically you were saying that God put the rulers in place, right? Basically, nothing happens without our Creator allowing it or putting it, the works in motion to create that outcome, right? So, do you think that is all part of the plan as well? The fact that Satan has done the things that he's done? I've often wondered about that. What are your opinions on that?